So as I say, I'm Sally, I'm Partnership Manager at Paycare, and I'm going to hand over now to Gemma, who's going to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about herself.
Thank you, Sal. So I'm just going to share my screen, everyone. Just bear with me a moment while I do this. It'd be really helpful to get a thumbs up as well, that we can see my screen. Thank you, Sal. Okay. So as Sal kindly mentioned, my name is Gemma. I'll be leading the majority of today's workshop, and I wanted to begin by giving you a little bit of background about who I am, what I do, and why I do it. So I actually come from the corporate world myself. Following my degree in business management, I climbed the corporate ladder and worked in the marketing industry. And it was as a result of a lot of the stress that I experienced in this environment that I reached a state of burnout and actually ended up diagnosed with quite a rare autoimmune condition called Graves' disease that attacks the thyroid. So following on from this experience, I actually left corporate and went on my own sort of wellbeing journey to try and discover ways that I could manage my health and wellbeing through self-care. And it was from that point that I ended up undertaking a large degree of training in massage therapy, yoga teaching. I'm also a meditation and breathwork instructor, and I'm also trained in mental health as well. So it's from this point that I began to extend what I had learned and benefited from to the corporate world. And that is what I do today, primarily as a corporate wellness provider, helping other companies such as Paycare to improve the well-being of their team and improve their company culture. And last but not least, proud Chihuahua mama. So if you hear any barking, she's obviously having a go at the postman for delivering all my cards from Valentine's Day. But that's a little bit about me, and over to Sal to do a little bit of an introduction about Paycare.
Okay, thanks, Gemma. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you already know about Paycare, but for any new people on board with us today, maybe the first time that you've been on one of our webinars, just a little bit about Paycare. Not going to read it all out, but just simply to say we are a not-for-profit health cash plan provider. We're passionate about wellbeing, we're passionate about supporting people, and we tend to partner up with people like Gemma who share our missions, are primarily concerned about improving the well-being for all. As we go through today, I will share just a little bit more information about Paycare, but I just wanted to do that, just general little bit of an introduction to us.
Amazing, thank you. So today's workshop, what we will be covering, and first and foremost, I'd like to bring your attention to the link at the bottom of the page. It might be useful to follow this now. I think Sal is going to post it in the chat as well, so you can just click from there and access our planner. If you don't have access to this for whatever reason, it's absolutely fine. I'd recommend grabbing yourself a pen and paper though, so you can fully interact with the session and get the most out of it. So what we'll be working through today is an introduction to what self-care is, what it looks like, some of the myths that might surround it and trying to dispel some of those, and why we're talking about it in the first place, why it's so important, and then importantly, how we can implement self-care into our busy daily lives, both in our work and personal life, how we can find time for self-care and make it a priority. And then finally, we're going to look at some strategies for how self-care can be implemented into the workplace to benefit the team, the management and the culture. And then, as Sal mentioned, there will be an opportunity at the end of today's session for questions and answers, but please feel free to interact throughout the session and share your thoughts, use the chat function, feel free to unmute yourself and contribute. We really get the most out of these sessions when they are interactive, so please don't be shy. But I wanted to begin really simple with a quick quick definition of self-care. We've got a message in the chat. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Sal. So if you just click on that link, you can download the self-care planner, put it to one side for now. We will come back to that in a few slides' time. Okay, so beginning with a little bit of a definition into what self-care is. I think there's a little bit of a buzzword that kind of gets flung around and people maybe don't quite align with what it is, or don't quite appreciate how simple it can be. And maybe it feels quite alienating to people if they don't have a lot of money, a lot of time to indulge themselves in self-care. But when we talk about self-care, we're quite simply referring to the individual practice of health management without the aid of a medical professional. So this is everything outside of medical care that we can do to benefit and improve our sense of well-being. So this might look like our basic hygiene and things like nutrition, things like managing stress in our life and taking ownership of our health and our well-being. Okay, so why do we think self-care is so important? Now, there's lots of different reasons. There's no one reason that self-care is so valuable, and it does look different for everyone, but I'd like you to have a little think about that and share your thoughts in the chat. Why are we talking about self-care? Why do we think it might be really, really important, particularly in today's climate? As the slide says, absolutely no right or wrong answers. I'm really keen to get your understanding and your feedback really on why self-care is a must. So drop your thoughts in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself if you're feeling bold. And I'll just jump into the chat, give you a moment to do that. Why is self-care so important? Why are we talking about it today? Why are we all here to kind of learn a little bit more about self-care?
I'll kind of kick off.
Yeah.
I'll kind of say, so for me, it's really definitely to prevent burnout. Just getting overtired, getting completely overwhelmed with things. So that's my reasoning. And we've got some bits in the chat here to avoid being ill. Absolutely, Stephanie. Yeah, burnout, the same as me. To ensure we continue to function. Yes, definitely. Work and live. Yeah, thanks guys for popping those in.
Yeah, Elsa also makes a really valid point. If you're not looking after yourself, you're not any help to supporting others. Absolutely. So some really good thoughts that certainly align with all the reasons that I would put forward as a case for self-care. So I wanted to kind of summarize my own thoughts on the matter as well. If we look at the current landscape in terms of healthcare, we are sadly experiencing a little bit of a crisis in the healthcare system, and there is a great deal of pressure on our healthcare system. So things like access to healthcare are becoming more challenging, and certainly different kind of pockets of the healthcare system we're beginning to see privatised. So it can be quite costly to access basic healthcare, particularly in other countries. We're very fortunate in this country, as I know, but this could change. So what we want to think about when we practice self-care is how we can limit our need to access healthcare and what we can do day to day as a preventative measure in order to keep ourselves healthy and well. And as a couple of people mentioned in the chat, we want to manage stress so it avoids becoming that point of burnout. And when we talk about burnout, we're quite simply referring to this state of physical and emotional and mental exhaustion. So this is an absolute point where we can't continue. And we are seeing, unfortunately, in recent years, a real upward trajectory in the cases of burnout. So if we look after ourselves, if we implement good self-care practices, we're better able to cope with stress. We're more resilient to stress. So this helps us to mitigate burnout. Also, we want to think about our longevity in life. Obviously, the things we do right now might not impact us in the moment, but if we think about our long-term habits and how they kind of compound in order to impact our longevity, it kind of be quite, sorry, would someone just able to
sorry, yeah,
all right, no problem. If we are thinking about habits in the long term, we might only see sort of a gradual impact, and then in the long term it's quite a steep upward kind of trajectory in terms of how our habits compound. So we want to think about what we do now and how it's going to impact us in 10, 20, 30 years time, etc. And also think about our day-to-day life and our enjoyment of life and our energy levels. So good self-care helps us to feel more energetic and enjoy the here and now as well as the long term. And then we also want to think about how practicing self-care helps us to build resilience, helps us to be better able to deal with the challenges that life throws at us day to day. So when we think about resilience, I'd like you to use this idea of it being like a muscle. So in the same way we go to the gym, we train our muscles, we get fitter and stronger. Our resilience is very, very much the same. So the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that helps us to regulate our emotions, improves our memory, helps us to deal with stress, and just feel more able to cope with life, is what we're doing when we practice self-care. So certain self-care techniques that we'll talk about in a few slides time actively help us to thicken and strengthen that region of the brain that is responsible for our emotional resilience. And then finally, as a couple of people touched on in the chat, it is really important in terms of our own wider relationships. So you can't give from an empty cup. So if you aren't able to look after yourself and give the best of yourself to others, then we're not going to be able to nurture our relationships in the best way possible. Good. Okay, so now we're going to look at the different types of self-care. It's a really broad term, and it encompasses a number of different areas. And I'd like you to think about self-care and the different areas as all really significant. They often overlap and intersect, but they can't exist in isolation. And to kind of demonstrate this, for example, we could be really healthy in our diet, we could be really good with our exercise regime, but if we feel lonely and we don't have people around us to support us during more challenging periods of our lives, then this isn't enough on its own. And there's been lots of recent studies that actually find loneliness can reduce our lifespan by 10 years, up to 10 years. So it's certainly becoming more commonplace to talk about the importance that our social interactions play in our daily well-being. So some examples of self-care, as I mentioned before, we have our physical self-care. So this can look like things such as sleep, diet, exercise. By no means is this list exhaustive, but this is to give you some examples. And then we have our social form of self-care. So this could be as simple as calling a friend, going on a walk, spending time with your loved ones, having a support network such as a volunteer group, or any sort of social activity that we have in our life. And then looking at our mental form of self-care. So this can be thinking about how we speak to ourselves, our positive self-talk, and practicing compassion towards ourselves. And it can also look like how we are training our brain in order to build that resilience muscle that I talked about. And ways we can do this, for example, things like crosswords, Sudoku, which my partner likes to do, learning a new skill. So things like learning a language or an instrument are very good ways to strengthen the prefrontal cortex in the brain and help us to become more mentally resilient and look after ourselves. And then spiritual self-care. When we talk about this, it's not necessarily having a religious practice, but it can be. I would identify someone who's quite spiritual, but I wouldn't say I'm particularly religious. So I don't want you to feel put off or alienated by this term. This could look like something such as living in line with your values or having a wider purpose in your life outside of yourself, or it could be a mindfulness practice. It could be things like meditation, yoga, etc. So we need to think about our spiritual forms of self-care that enrich our sense of well-being. And then finally, emotional self-care. So this can be things like either talking to someone or maybe journaling down our feelings, but this is how we regulate our emotions. This is how we look at our emotional intelligence, our ability to feel compassion and empathy towards others, and also how we set boundaries so that other people don't infringe on our emotional well-being. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a good overview of the different forms of self-care that we need in order to completely look after our well-being as a whole. And I'd like you to now refer to the worksheet or your pen and paper, either is fine. And I'd like you to write down each section and a couple of examples that either you currently practice that fulfill these categories, or that you would like to, or that you could practice in order to benefit you. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that, and feel free to drop any thoughts in the chat, ask any questions if you need any clarification. And then we're all going to share a little bit about what we've come up with. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to do that. I'm just going to jump in the chat. Okay, so listing some physical, some social, mental, spiritual and emotional forms of self-care that you may practice currently or that you would like to practice. Trying to get a mixture of different forms, and what you might notice is some of them overlap, and that's fine. You could even write them in both or overlapping. Yeah, early nights for plenty of sleep. Yeah, so that's a really good example of physical self-care. Also arguably improves our mental well-being as well. I'm certainly more resilient when I've had my 8 hours and lacking in resilience when I haven't. So don't worry if you feel like you could carry on writing. It's not War and Peace, but we can certainly come back to this after the session. This is just a really good overview. I'm going to give you a couple more minutes and then please pop down your ideas in the chat. Crafting and Pilates. I'm actually offended you didn't say yoga. But yeah, crafting is really, really good. I would say that kind of sits within potentially social, also mental. Yeah, reflexology and consistent. Yeah, so having that routine, that bedtime routine, having that structure. And I love reflexology as well. It's a really good example of self-care. Again, that's, I would say, physical, but also potentially mental and emotional form of self-care. And it's great if you can check off a few in the same activity. Okay. Training and learning. So yeah, this is really, really good for our mental self-care, meditation, journaling. Yeah. So I really agree with you on that. Journaling is a great way to express our feelings and kind of break them down. I'm tempted to learn. Brilliant. I've been saying the same thing for several years. Learning a language is really, really good. Isn't it amazing that something that we do for our own personal development can also strengthen our resilience and our ability to deal with emotional challenges? I find that really, really interesting. Neuroscience is kind of only just at the tip of the iceberg of understanding what the human brain is possible of. Okay, so one more pointer to think about when we're looking at different types of self-care, and I think we've really kind of covered this well in the examples that we've already listed, but we have different types of self-care in that they can be temporary or enduring. And what I mean by this is, for example, going to dinner with a friend is a great way to look after our social needs. It's a good form of social self-care. However, after we've parted ways, we only really experience the benefit for a short period of time. We need to continue to engage in that activity to really get the benefit from that. However, there are also enduring forms of self-care. And these are ones that continue to benefit us after we have actually done the activity and when we're not actually actively doing it. So some examples of this would be practicing mindfulness or meditation, because the reason for this is we actually change the structure of our brain. So it continues to work for us even when we're not actively doing it. Another example might be, for example, physical exercise, where we continue to reap the benefits afterwards. We have more energy, we're fitter, more active, our body is better able to take care of ourselves and things like that. So I'd like you to refer back to your list quickly and just make sure you have a nice mix of temporary and enduring. And if you need any clarification on this, drop me a message in the chat. But it's really important to have a mixture of both. And if you don't have enduring means of self-care, then think about a couple you could add now. So learning a language, for example, is another really, really great one, because it does change the structure of our brain. I'm just going to jump in the chat now as well. Wow, some really great examples here. Ailsa, yoga, sleep, my favorite. Learning a language, walking the dogs, self-reflection, good. Walking the dogs is great because you're getting outside, you're doing physical exercise, and you're also getting a little bit of headspace as well. So I think you're ticking a lot of different boxes there. Lynn, dog walking, yeah, eating healthily. But yeah, absolutely not denying yourself treats is really important. Podcasts, saying no, and we'll talk about that in a few slides time. Puzzle book. Cycling, yeah, brilliant. So we continue to gain a lot of benefits from cycling. So that's a really good example of enduring self-care. Okay, fabulous. You guys are absolutely awesome. So next up, I'm going to cover how we can implement it. So we have a good understanding of self-care, what it is, what it looks like. And that often isn't the challenge. The challenge is implementing self-care, finding time for self-care. So this is largely due to, first of all, our busy lives and the limited time that we have. For example, we might have a lot of commitments in the form of work, family, and social activities. But also it's how we view self-care as a society. So it's often seen as a luxury or a nice to have, rather than something that is a necessary part of our well-being that we need to kind of fit everything else in around. But the problem is when we view it in this way, we actually rarely end up doing it because it always falls to the bottom of the pile. So I'd like you to, first of all, begin thinking about it as a priority, and think about it as something that you schedule in first and fit everything else around. And it is for this reason, this restriction of time in our life, that we often experience guilt. Now, I'm going to ask Sal to share a quick poll with you now, because I'm really interested to find out if you feel guilty taking time for self-care. Oh, we're already here. So it should have popped up in your screen. Do you feel guilty taking time for self-care?
I don't think it has, Gemma, because I'm logged in from another advice. I'm not sure if you might be able to do it, Gemma. Finish your co-host. Could you just have a look at the bottom?
It's already come up, and 8 people have answered.
Oh, there you go then. It's not come up on mine, but that's all good, isn't it?
Who
needs me? It's good.
Straight. Yeah. Okay. So we've got 90% have participated.
Wow.
So, Sal, I think maybe it's just you.
It's me. It's okay. It's cool. Can you see the results? That's the main thing.
Let's see the result. Oh, here we go. Yeah, everyone's participated. Okay, end poll. So 7 out of 10 people said yes, they feel guilty for taking time for self-care. And 30%, 3 out of 10 said no. So that's really, really interesting. I'm going to share the results there as well so you can see them, Sal. Does that come up?
Not with me, but don't worry, that's fine.
Well, obviously you're not on the list.
It's probably just because, yeah, we've got 2 people logged in on our account and because I've got lots open on my screen just to make sure that, don't worry, it's fine.
Amazing. So really, really, really interesting actually to see the majority of people feel guilty taking time for self-care. We've already nailed what self-care is, and we've got some great examples that we like to practice, but we have this block in that we feel guilty taking time for self-care. And I'd be really interested to learn why it is you feel guilty. And there's, again, we're not trying to catch anyone out. I'm just really, really curious. So if you have any insights, then please share them. Stephanie says more so since becoming a new mum. And absolutely, we were talking about this before we jumped on the live call, that often people I see feel the most guilt are mums because they have this sense of mum guilt where putting someone else before their own needs is the most important thing in their life. But equally, we can reframe that approach by thinking about how we're able to give the best of ourselves. Okay.
Yeah, I feel guilty when I haven't got through all my jobs. And of course, my list is endless. I never get through it. It's always a mad rush. And so I do feel really guilty when I do stop to take care of my son.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I hear that a lot. And it is really, really difficult. And we're going to look at some strategies for how we can make the most of our time in order to do that in a few slides' time. So Absolutely. I hope anyone listening, anyone who maybe doesn't feel quite comfortable sharing, recognizes that you're not alone if you feel guilty taking time for self-care. And it is, in fact, the results of our poll are very telling and more than we expected, because recent research from Birchbox found that a third of people felt guilty for taking time for self-care. But I would argue it's higher. And actually, when I speak to people, and obviously doing this poll today, we can see a lot of people feel like guilt. And it's certainly something that I've felt from time to time. But I think when we recognise the benefit that we're able to get from it and how we can actually factor this in realistically, it's something that we can become more inclined to do. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is reframing our approach. So what we need is to create a compelling enough reason in our mind to take action. So rather than saying, I need to do this, I'm going to do this, let's create something that inspires us to want to do this. So if you refer to the second page of the handout, if you have that, and if not, just grab yourself your sheet of paper, and I'd like you to work through some of these journaling prompts. What we can do is ask ourselves really, really good quality questions in order to come to a conclusion for ourselves, rather than being told by someone else that we need to do this, because that's not enough of a motivation. It needs to be intrinsic, it needs to be internal. So first of all, I'd like you to, and this doesn't again have to be War and Peace, I'd like you to write down what happens when I don't find time for self-care. So what do you notice when you don't find time for self-care? If you've neglected those practices for a few days, a few weeks, are there any changes in your physical, your emotional state, your mental well-being? No right or wrong answer, by the way. And again, if you feel comfortable, drop that in the chat. Got a message. Lose clarity on things. Yeah, so everything kind of feels a bit fuzzy and it's hard to focus. And I think there's this idea that I hear a lot, people saying I don't have time for meditation, for example. And this always is an interesting one, because if we think about how our mind works when it's crowded and it's overwhelmed, we actually find it more difficult to process things. We find it difficult to remember things. We find it difficult to have clarity. So what I would always ask people is, have you got time not to? Because those 15 or 10 minutes, whatever they are, you spend on meditation give you better clarity, give you better focus, and give you a more productive work style. Get grumpy when I don't take time out, and then others suffer. So yeah, Ailsa, what would be the impact of that? So taking us to the next question now, what is the impact when you are grumpy on your relationships, for example? And please don't feel as though any guilt or shame admitting this, because I know for a fact that when I'm tired, I get quite snappy at my partner, and then he gets snappy, and it kind of has a really negative spiral. And it is purely down to the fact that maybe I've not taken time to look after myself. Stress and anxiety builds. Yeah, so that's the resilience muscle that we talked about earlier. So when we feel stressed, when we feel anxious, this degrades that resilience muscle. So something that can seem minute ends up being blown up out of proportion, and then we struggle to handle it. Yeah, wrong decisions. Yeah, so maybe mistakes, decisions. And again, thinking about our brain as being kind of overcrowded, overwhelmed, thinking about our stress bucket bubbling over. So what we do when we practice self-care is we open up the tap, and we're able to release some of that stress in a healthy form. With self-care, I can relax and put things into perspective. 100%. Yeah. Brilliant. Some really, really, really great feedback. And I think it's nice to see that so many of us can relate to each other's situations as well. Yeah. Okay, so thinking about the wider impact of that. So as we touched on before, how that impacts our relationships, how that impacts our work. And we've kind of given a couple of examples here, making mistakes, maybe being grumpy with our partners, again, what is the wider impact of that? How does this impact our social lives? I think someone mentioned, but we all kind of interact differently with others. Some people withdraw more when they feel stressed, tired, overwhelmed. Some people might need to blow off steam and maybe do this in a way that's not healthy. So a lot of this is becoming aware of our own behavioural patterns as well. And these are unique to us. Yeah. Sal, you're not alone. Okay. So I don't want to paint too much of a bleak picture, but we can see that when we don't allow self-care to become a must and instead see it as a nice to have, perhaps, life gets busy. We all have busy lives. I find, during certain times, busy work periods over maybe the Christmas period or the run up to Christmas, when you just keep telling yourself, I don't have time. And then this time that's meant to be fun and enjoyable ends up becoming just stressful. So thinking about the wider impact of that. Okay, and now I'd like you to make some notes and think about what happens when I do find time for self-care. And we've kind of touched upon this already, so you can absolutely reiterate what you've already put down. So what does that look like when you find time for self-care? And often it'll be the opposite of what happens when I don't find time for self-care. So are you able to think with more clarity? Are you able to improve your communication with your family, with your partners, with your friends? I say partners in the plural. I mean as a group, unless of course there is several, in which case I hope you get lots of cards today. Okay, so what happens when I do find time for self-care? And then feel free to pop those in the chat. How do you feel when you find time for self-care? More energy. I really like that, Stephanie. Less stressed. More in control. Feel less negative about things. Yeah, and I can give myself as an example here. And I think we spoke about this last week, Sal. I felt beginning of last week just very kind of in that negative headspace. And the temptation is, I find, to push myself a little bit harder, because I think it must be like a form of punishment, in that I'm struggling, so I need to kind of prove myself or do more, be more productive. But what happens is this can often send you on that downward spiral we talked about. So taking a step back from all of the noise, all of the clutter, and implementing some great self-care practices can really help flip that situation. And I actually was able to, as a result of that, feel a lot better in the latter part of last week. See things more clearly. Yeah, brilliant. So what is the wider benefit of that? So when you have all of these things, when you have clarity, when you have positivity, how does that impact you in a wider sense? How does that benefit your work, your friendships? And what is the result of that? Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can be isolating, living alone and thinking about the last 3 years and being locked down is really, really hard. So it's really important we have an outlet to process those emotions, whether or not that's phoning a friend, whether or not that's journaling, spending time with loved ones on the weekend. It's really, really important. Yeah, enjoying time. So when you're with your daughter, Stephanie, actually being in the moment and not thinking about all the things you've got to do. Yeah, some lovely examples: inspired, positive, engaged, excited, more self-esteem. That's a really good one, self-esteem. So how we show up for ourselves day to day is more positive, and that definitely radiates outwards. That definitely impacts our relationships, and it's kind of a bit like a magnet for those around us who also feel inspired by that. Okay, so some lovely examples. The final part of the puzzle for reframing this approach is to create that compelling reason why we practice self-care. So this is our why, this is our motivation. Next time we are ignoring that little voice in the head that says I need to look after myself, this is something you can refer to. You can use it as an affirmation or a mantra. You can put it on a post-it note, on the mirror, whatever it is, on the fridge. why do you practice self-care? Trying to sum that up in a sentence or 2 sentences that are going to really motivate you. So this might be, I practice self-care because, or so that I can be a better mum, or I practice self-care so that I can have more energy and enjoy the day to day, or I practice self-care so that I can live a more inspired, enjoyable life, whatever it is. Okay, and these are just some examples I'm giving. You might kind of combine a couple as well. That's absolutely fine. So what is your compelling reason for why you practice self-care? And when you've come up with that, and if you need to ponder it, that's absolutely fine. I'd like you to share it in the chat with others to help kind of inspire them and inspire some other ideas. Yeah, it's therapeutic to be the best version of myself for me and others. Brilliant. Really, really good. Anyone else like to share? I practice self-care so that I'm more chilled and have a less messy head. It's good for me and it's good for my community, 100%. To be my most authentic self, lovely. So that I can experience and appreciate special moments I share with my father, who that is lovely. Yeah, really, really nice. Absolutely. And I think it's easy to not appreciate and enjoy the present when we're always thinking outside of it to the past or the future. So I think it's definitely worth reminding ourselves that self-care helps us to enjoy the moment as well. Some lovely, lovely examples. Okay, so we've now got some great activities. We've got our reason for why we practice self-care. I'd like you to actually make it happen. So this is the action plan, and this is taken from the self-care planner. So if you have that in front of you, you can use that, or you can draw yourself a little graph table just like this. So it's all very well having the idea, the motivation, but we need to think about the practicalities of this. And that is the time that we need in order to do that and when we're going to do that. So for each of your different self-care practices in each category, I'd like you to be really specific and think about realistically, how long do you need for each activity? So this could be twice a month, 10 minutes, or an hour a week. Or 5 minutes a day, for example, if it's meditation. So how long do you need for each activity? Just quickly jot that down, and don't worry if you need a little bit longer to think about this. You can take that away and do that absolutely after the session. This is just a good starting point to get you thinking about how long you need. And then when you are done, if you could just give me a heads up in the chat, and we'll move on to the next section. So how long does each part of your self-care plan take? How long do you need? Let's be realistic. Yoga, 1 hour per week. Fantastic. Tonight being a great example of that, Sal. We're doing a yoga session this evening. Let me know when you're done, or just give me a thumbs up. Oh, Tai Chi and then sauna. 2 hours, brilliant. Really specific. Okay, so the next part of the table is, when are you going to do this? Okay, so Sal, when are you going to do this yoga? You've got 1 hour per week. Tai Chi class and sauna, when is that? And be really specific again. Is it after the school run? Is it on a Saturday morning before the children get up? Is it after work at 5 p.m. or on my lunch break? Be as specific as you can and put a time to it. So an amount of time that it's going to take, and then when you're going to do it in the next column for each activity. So when are you going to fit those 2 hours into your week? And if it's a struggle, how can you think about breaking that down? So let's think about the practicalities of these different things that we want to do. If you are learning a language, that takes a lot of time. So what can you do? Can you do 10 minutes Duolingo after the kids have gone to bed or before work in the morning? That's breaking it down into bite-sized chunks and not seeing it as something that needs to be indulgent and hours of time if we don't have it. If we do, it's great. But I'm aware we're busy. We all have jobs. A lot of us have families, hobbies. Can you incorporate this as well into your working day? So is there an opportunity on your lunch break, or is there an opportunity between meetings to just do some quick breath work, meditation, exercise? Think about that in a practical sense as well. And then finally, the final part of the puzzle, I'd like you to, depending on what it is you work from, whether or not it's Google Calendars, Outlook, a diary, a journal, I'd like you to take that diary, calendar, etc., and begin to plan time in your diary. So make an appointment with yourself to do this yoga class, to practice your meditation, to go on a run, to spend time with your family. So this is your Valentine's date with yourself. And I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that, because we will be here all day if we have to put 20 different things in our diary. So just do a couple, just make a start. And I'm conscious of the time. We've got a couple more slides left. So when you've done a couple of those and you feel good about it, and you have made that commitment to finish it later, which I absolutely want to hold you accountable to. Sal, can you put that on the email? Some accountability after the session to continue to do this. Drop me a message in the chat. Let me know you've done a couple, and we will finish off with a little bit more about how we can implement it in our workplace. I'm hoping everyone's busy writing, tapping away. It's a good sign. Brilliant. You have yoga only just. Brilliant. It's in my diary as well. Really looking forward to it. Okay. Couple more minutes. How are we getting on? Okay, we're going to leave it there, and Sally's going to drop you an email afterwards and check that you've all continued to finish this after the session. All right, so really worthwhile taking those 15 minutes or whatever it is to plan in your self-care, and try to get into the habit of doing this first. So if you can set a reoccurring diary reminder for Sunday afternoon, Wednesday morning, whatever it is, and then fit in your meetings around that, fit in your social life or commitments around that. Okay, amazing work. So I'm going to hand back to Sal, who's got a quick question for you.
Okay, so we've had a look at what it means to ourselves for self-care, but just really wanted to touch quite quickly, and Gemma's got a little bit more on this, about self-care at work and the benefits behind that, clearly, and a lot of us will be in the workplace at the moment. So just a really quick rhetorical question about how many working days were lost due to work-related stress, depressions and anxiety in 1920. I'm aware that that is COVID year, and obviously since then COVID will have had an impact, so figures will likely to be changed, but just, you know, let's just have a think about how that might be in your head. Just think about what you think those figures might be. And Gemma, if you want to move on to the next slide, we will actually have a look at that. There you go. So there's a couple of facts for us. So that's a lot. 17.9 million days lost in Great Britain alone on work days lost for stress, anxiety, depression. 828,000 workers suffering from work-related stress, depression or anxiety, whether that be new, which might have been around the COVID issues, or long-standing in 1920. It will be interesting to see the facts and the figures when they come out now for the following years, whether COVID and working from home and everything else after it has eased that, or whether, as I suspect, the effects of COVID probably may have taken those figures up. So I just thought those might be interesting figures for us all to have a little look at and maybe just digest, especially if you are in a working environment today, whether that's in HR or whether, you know, just from yourselves and your own point of view. So I think Gemma's going to move on with a little bit more now.
Sorry, I was muted and chatting to myself. So yeah, I was just mentioning in the chat, Elsa shared an article that's definitely worth having a look at later on. Thank you for sharing that one, Elsa. And now we're going to round off today's workshop by thinking about some ways we can implement self-care in the workplace. So how can you maintain your self-care routine whilst at work, and how can you encourage others to do that around you? So I am going to share some simple takeaways. They're not particularly expensive or costly in terms of time or money, but they are certainly impactful ways that you can benefit both your own time at work and the culture. So the first and foremost one, you probably hear it constantly, but taking regular breaks. This has been proven to improve our productivity, our focus, and our performance in the workplace. And also it is a form of self-care. So whether or not that looks like a quick comfort break, grabbing a drink before meetings, etc., whether or not that means going for a walk, but it does mean having your lunch and having your time away from your desk as well as at your desk. Okay, and then again, feeding into this idea of movement, and we're seeing some really creative examples of this. For example, chair yoga, which I teach, walking meetings, which are a really great way to still have a business agenda, but also get in some self-care, or going for a walk on your lunch break, whatever it is, but trying to avoid being sat at a desk for 8 hours straight, because quite simply our bodies were not designed to do that. It's not good for our posture, it's not good for our skeletal system. I find this every month when I massage the team at Paycare, that we have lots of knots and tension in our backs and shoulders because of how we're sat at a desk. So to add to that point as well, we want to think about our desk setup. And this is both a health and safety responsibility of the workplace, and also something we can implement by having, for example, ergonomic chairs, the proper equipment, but also having an environment that is mindful and that does not cause us any additional stress. So can we maybe clear some of the clutter that surrounds us to help clear some of our mental clutter and create an environment where we feel calm, where we feel focused, and where we feel in control? Okay, setting boundaries, which we touched upon earlier, and is a really important point to improve our workplace well-being. So boundaries are not a luxury that are exclusive to the management in a company. Boundaries are something that we all can and should have, and also should be mindful and respectful of other people's. So boundaries in the workplace might look like saying no when we actually mean it, rather than saying yes and resenting someone afterwards, or speaking up when someone makes you feel uncomfortable or something makes you feel uncomfortable. And when I was thinking about this, it reminded me of back when I was in corporate, when I was in my first role and I was 21, and I was maybe the most junior when I started, but got continually busy. And I just remember my work being constantly interrupted when I was on calls, when I was working on a project to make a round of drinks for 15 people. And as the youngest and the only woman in the office, I started to feel a little bit like it wasn't being respectful of my time and my boundaries, and really that it was something that should be a shared responsibility. So I had a very uncomfortable conversation, or something I thought would be uncomfortable, but was actually respected and heard and listened to, and I felt so much better for doing. So how can we implement some boundaries that respect our time and enable us to honour our commitments rather than saying yes to everything and then feeling overwhelmed and stressed? Okay, staying hydrated. So you probably again hear this rhetoric time and time again, but what might this look like in the workplace? How can you set up your workplace to encourage people to be more hydrated and therefore able to focus more? So having things like a water cooler, having maybe a fridge with bottled water in, having a challenge amongst your work colleagues to stay more hydrated, and also giving yourself an opportunity to get up and away from your desk as well at the same time. Okay, and then how can you build support networks within the workplace? So this really feeds into a form of social self-care. And this, for example, could be having mental health first aiders that you can go to if you need mental health support, or having wellness champions, or if you don't have a wellbeing manager. Paycare have a good example of this. They have mental health first aiders. They do a lot of things like coffee mornings, cake mornings, which is obviously about the cake, but it's also about the social interaction, the support and the conversations that come from it as well. So how can you implement that? Do you have regular one-to-ones where feedback is encouraged and it's a two-way thing so that you can seek more support if you need it and if you're feeling overwhelmed? Okay, and then another suggestion for how you can bring more self-care to the workplace is through mindfulness. And this is my area of expertise. This is what I work with companies on. And Paycare, again, are a really good case study of bringing mindfulness to the workplace. There is a lovely, there's 2 rooms actually, where you can go and relax, that are very calming, that take you away from your desk. And there's lovely quotes and posters on the wall to bring you a little bit of mindfulness, lots of plants. Diffusers, so you're really calming the senses as well. They also have obviously massages, yoga classes, and they have also tried weekly meditations with the team as well that give people a few minutes away from their desk to focus on their well-being. So this doesn't have to be expensive or time consuming, but there are some simple creative ways that we can bring that to the workplace. And then finally, closing off with this really, really important reminder. Again, it's about putting on your own oxygen mask first before helping others. So you want to think about how you can put yourself first in order to be better in the workplace and to help people and serve people to a greater extent. So a little reminder there to put yourself first, and then you're able to benefit everyone else in the workplace. Okay. So that's pretty much everything from my side. But if you would like to discuss this in more detail and you are interested in bringing a wellbeing strategy into the company where you work and need some guidance and support doing that, then please do reach out. I am offering everyone a complimentary 30-minute debrief consultation. And just to book that, all you need to do is contact me by the email listed below, and I think Sal will be dropping this in on the email afterwards as well, so don't worry if you haven't had a chance to write it down, but that is my offer to anyone, and if you have any questions as well, you can reach out via my email. And some resources, as I mentioned, my contact details. If you enjoyed today's workshop, be really, really grateful for a testimonial on Facebook, and also if you haven't already, grab yourself the self-care planner, and maybe if you wanted to try meditation as well, there's a couple of really great apps there that you can do it on. Okay, so back to Sal to round off with a little bit more information.
Thanks, Gemma. Hopefully everybody's found that really, really useful. Just wanted to pop a couple of slides up to you. Again, I am aware that we've obviously already got some customers on board, but we probably got some new faces on here as well. I'm not going to talk all the way through this, but I know Gemma's touched on what we do for our own staff here at Paycare, but also I just wanted to touch on what we can do for our customers. The kind of wellbeing services that we can offer, so My Pocket GP, so that we can get in touch with the GP 24 hours a day. Counselling and helpline services are also part of the plans. Paycare perks, where you can get money off things, and some online health assessments. So really useful tools there. Just moving on to the next slide, Gemma. Thank you. If you're not a customer, some really nice stuff on social media we provide for people, some blogs, some really useful top 10 tips on things. We've always got these going around on social media. These are really, really helpful tips for people on all sorts of things, financial well-being. It might be on self-care like we've done today, on different perks. You'll find us on all forms of social media. Again, I'll send the links out to everybody. We also do have a partnership with Kaleidoscope Plus Group. So if you are interested in mental health training, they're our partners and we can put you in contact with those guys. They offer great support on mental health training. So, you know, lots of things that we can offer. And as Gemma said, if you want to get in touch with me as well, what I will do after this is send out an email to everybody, if that's okay, just to ask for some feedback on the session, but also just to send you the slides and to provide all of the links and all the resources so that you know where to get hold of everything. And yeah, just moving on to the very last slide, just a nice little, I know Gemma just mentioned about motivational quotes. I just thought there were a few nice things on here just to have a little think about. I think things we're all guilty about. So if it feels wrong, don't do it. Say what you mean. I think that's a really important one. Don't be a people pleaser. I bet you all would say you that. Most of us are. Trust in instincts. Never speaking bad of yourself. I'm really bad for that. Never giving up on dreams, and don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to say yes either. Be kind to yourself. That's really been at the forefront for the last few years for people. Let go of what you can't control. Really, really important. Staying away from drama and negativity. Easier said than done, but there you go. And obviously the thing for Valentine's Day today, love and love yourself. And that, guys, wraps it up. So I will send out some information to you all, but thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure to share Gemma's time with you all. Have a really good day and look after yourselves.
Thank you. And if anyone has any questions,
yeah, feel free to stay on. That would be great.